Hello and welcome to medicsvoices.com, where we speak to the key opinion leaders on health and medicine. Today I'm talking to Professor Marie Murphy, who is undoubtedly one of the world leaders in research on physical activity. I caught up with Marie literally down by the trackside.
I started life as a physical education teacher, and I taught for a couple of years in Northern Ireland and in London. And then I still was very interested in doing some more studying and learning a little bit more about the physiology, I suppose, how the body responds to exercise. And so I did a master's and a PhD at Loughborough University, and during that time became more interested in something that was still called postprandial lipemia. So in other words, when you exercise, what changes in terms of your blood fats and how that might be linked to cardiovascular disease. And so I ended up working first of all in Ulster University, or University of Ulster as it was then, and my research has evolved over the years to look, I suppose, specifically at physical activity rather than exercise. So we think of exercise and sport as being something quite vigorous, something quite, structured in your day, whereas physical activity, the walking, the stair climbing, all of the things that you might do to get a little bit of movement, I became more interested in that, and probably over the 30 odd years of my research career have become more interested not in the physiological changes, but how do we get people to change their behavior? So we know exercise is good, or we know physical activity causes changes your risk of about 23 different diseases, but how do we get people who don't exercise or who don't like physical activity, how do we change them? And really that's been the focus of the last sort of 10 or 15 years, and my move to University of Edinburgh has been about leading a group, a physical activity for health research centre.
Loughborough must have been a fantastic environment. You must have met some really inspiring people there.
Yeah. Loughborough was probably the light that lit the fire of research for me. I was really fortunate to work with two greats in my mind. Clyde Williams was the professor there at the time, and he became my director of studies on my PhD, and Professor Adrian Hardman, who really was the first person to begin to look at walking. Her and Jeremy Morris were the two who wrote the sort of seminal paper on walking in health, because really prior to the sort of early 90s, medics and others dismissed walking because it wasn't vigorous enough. It wasn't your running, your aerobics, your 20 minutes of hard work, and it was kind of dismissed as something that wasn't worthy of promoting. Whereas now, in those 30 years, walking has become the cornerstone of public health, or physical activity for public health, and I think that Adrian Hardman and Jeremy Morris are probably the two that are responsible for that.
Now, your interest in walking is fascinating. How much walking should you do? How do you walk? How vigorous should it be?
Oh, hope you have all day now, because this is where I get on my hobby horse. Okay, all walking is good for you. That's the first thing. And for the vast majority of the population, it's something that we all do every day and that we can do, and it doesn't require any skill elements. So most of us are doing it from about a year old onwards. So unlike loads of other types of physical activity, walking it's ubiquitous. It's something that can appeal to anyone. It doesn't have social barriers. It doesn't have cost barriers. You don't need a gym. You don't need equipment. So to me, it is the perfect form of exercise, or the perfect form of physical activity. Now, how should you do it? I guess any walking is good, no matter what you do. And we've heard of things like 10,000 steps and etc. But essentially what you want to do is, if you can do 150 minutes a week, and that translates to about 20 or 30 minutes a day, that's what the current guidelines say. But as I've always said, and it really came from Professor Stephen Blair in the Cooper Aerobic Institute, some is good, but more is better. So there's no amount of walking that I think is bad for you. I think you should do some, but if you can do more, better. And then my particular bugbear is that if you can, you should try to walk a little more briskly, because dandering or window shopping sort of pace is okay and it gives you some benefits, but if you really want to get the benefits, then getting the heart rate up getting the blood beating harder or beating faster, and is really about walking briskly. So I'd say to people, walk at a pace as if you're a bit late for a meeting or you're a bit late for a bus, and try to get breathing a bit heavier than normal, but still able to carry on a conversation.
I'm feeling a bit guilty filming this down at the trackside because it's sort of associated with young, fit athletes. But really, walking and exercise is for everyone. What about exercise as we get older?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's where walking comes into its own, because like you, I'm still an avid runner and have been a sports person. But as you age, because your maximum capacity for exercise or your VO2 max declines, you aren't going to be able to run as long or play vigorous sport. But walking still allows you to get the level of stimulus to keep the health benefits. And I suppose importantly, walking, you're much less likely to get injured. So running causes injury. A lot of sports cause injuries, but it's very rare to find somebody getting injured, a musculoskeletal injury, just from walking. If they get injured walking, it's because of traffic or the environment or the surface. It's not because of the act of walking, because walking, of course, is low impact. You're not leaving the ground, and therefore you have a much less risk of injury, particularly joint injury.
Looking at this message about walking, how do we integrate that? How do we bring that into a public health message? How do we sell it?
I mean, I think there's a couple of different strands to that. I think first of all, we say that all walking is good for you. So if you can build walking into your day in short bouts, and that was kind of the nature of my PhD, whether you could split. When I started my career, we thought you had to exercise for 20 minutes. And if you stopped at 19 minutes to tie your shoe, you had to start again. That was the kind of thinking. We now know through my research and lots of others that you can split it up in small bouts. And really it adds up like loose change. If you put all your loose change at the end of the day, after a couple of weeks, you've got quite a volume of it. Same with walking, a minute here, a minute there, walking from the bus to your place of work, or walking your dog, whatever. All of that adds up to a quantum which is probably enough to keep you healthy. And I suppose that would be the message that I'd be saying to people is, if you think you don't have enough time to exercise, it's a key barrier, or you don't think you're fit enough, or you don't think you've got, the motivation. Well, small little bits can add up. So even a bit now, or I sometimes think the Fitbit, step counters, pedometers are good, because if you're about to sit down for the evening and collapse on the sofa, have a quick look. How many steps have you got? If you haven't had enough, quick walk around the block, or a quick walk out to a friend's house or back, or to the park and back, will probably be enough and allow you to finish your day by saying, okay, well, at least I did some walking today.
You achieved a huge amount in your research career. Where do you think research is going in physical activity?
So I still think we have a lot to do to figure out behavior change. We know changing habits and changing behaviors is really difficult. So I still think there's more to know about that. And in physical activity, for me, it's how do we change the least active people? People like you and I, we enjoy physical activity. We like it. We will make time for it because it gives us great enjoyment and a good return. But there are a bunch of people who see exercise and physical activity the way I might see going to the dentist, something that I'll avoid and put off. Yeah. And how do we change their perception? And I think key to that is getting them to find a form of physical activity and a location for physical activity like this, green space or blue space, where they get the mental health benefits, they get the elevation of mood, they feel good, and they remember that. And the next time they're thinking, oh, I can't be bothered, I'm tired, it's dark, it's raining, they're able to recall that feeling of what it felt like when they finished activity. So I think that's probably where the research is going. And then the second thing is I think we're going to get much better at measuring physical activity. At the moment, to find out about physical activity, we tend to ask people, how much have you done in the last week or so? And we all know that self-report is not particularly good. It's not particularly reliable, and it's subject to bias. We tend to tell people what we think we should do rather than what we did. And so I think with the pervasiveness of smartphones and Fitbits and accelerometers, and they're becoming cheaper, I think there will be a time in the future, possibly not in my lifetime, but where we will be able to look at population level physical activity, device measured, and then we'll know who we should target and how we should target them. So those two things coming together, you know, the least active people and how do we change their behavior so that ultimately more people are more active more often.
For those of us who've been inspired by what you've said so far, how do you get into the research career? How do you continue a research career? Now, I ask you not just as an individual professor, but someone who has looked after doctoral students in the university right across the whole span of research.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with passion, and if you have a passion for physical activity, then we're blessed in the UK and you know, a lot of other places as well, but we have lots of good research units. And I suppose for me, it's trying to get into one of those units through doing your degree there, your master's there. We have lots of opportunities for paid PhDs, and I guess after that, it's about working with policymakers and practitioners and clinicians so that you identify the right questions, because research is only useful if it answers questions that need answered, yeah, in my opinion. And so it's the idea of co-producing research and talking to the clinicians, talking to patients, talking to populations, and trying to find out what is it that we need to know, and using that as the sort of stimulus or the basis for the research that you do.
Marie, you used a word there that describes your career beautifully. Thank you for sharing your passion for physical activity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, John.